But anyway, I love being in a room full of nonprofit dreamers. We're all a little bit weird. We are a very weird group of people. And I say that with great respect, you know that, I'm one of you. And I've spent my life in the nonprofit world. Started my career actually in banking, right out of college, ended up in nonprofit and never left. And love that. And now what I get to do is I get to work with nonprofits because I don't want to run anybody's nonprofit. I'm not in the marketing for an executive director job. But I really admire you guys are doing a variety of work that's represented. My specialty is board training and development because I have worked for boards, served on boards, and consulted. I've learned a few things along the way. What makes boards successful and what makes boards not successful. So we only have about an hour together tonight, which is obviously not nearly the time that I would need to really. So my goal is to just kind of touch on a variety of subjects. You'll be able to see some materials that I have here. You'll be able to get some more materials from my website and hopefully walk away with some things that you can implement. That's my plan. Business actually is nonprofit formation. So I actually do the paperwork to have somebody become 501c3. And about 300 of them with 100% success rate with the IRS figured out their system. And I've done a number of them actually in Northern Colorado. I did the NoCo Swing, Foco Flava, Good Times Dance Club. I just did the Downtown Fort Collins Business Association. And Nicole Hendricks, who owns Sundance, she's turning a nonprofit into Rocky Mountain Country Music Association. They're nonprofit for them. So it's a great privilege for me to do. And that really is my do much more startup existing organizations. Some of the things that I tend to talk about aren't those things you're going to bring on me or hear from another consultant, primarily because the startup space is different. Different when you're an entrepreneur in that kind of a space, and it's different when you are in a profit in the space. So there's things sometimes that you do as a startup you don't do as a mature organization. So just so you know, that's the lens that I talk through, is because knowing that most people in this room are smaller nonprofits. So that's where I'll come from in that. So to get started here, you've got a couple of different handouts. And what I want to tell you about them is that these handouts I created, they stand alone. So it means that there's some duplication on these handouts. So I'm going to point out as we're talking kind of where I'm showing you things in these, but I just kind of wanted to show you, you've got those three handouts there, plus you've got a matrix, and of course you've got a place to take some notes. So this is going to be an interactive time together today. So, actually, you know what? Watch this. Peggy, can you give me a 10, a 5, and then a 1? Thank you. In case I can't see my watch now. So, all right. By the way, I have to say, I'm amazed at this gorgeous day that everybody's here sitting inside. But if you're like me, you'll probably go for a walk later after tonight. So, okay, so let's just talk a little bit about who's in the room right now. Want to know what you guys are up to? So, why don't you tell me who in this room does not have? By the way, when I say having a nonprofit, some people will have incorporated in the state of Colorado, but not have their 501c3 tax exempt status. So who in this room is looking to obtain a 501c3 tax exempt status? Yeah. Great. And so, should be almost everybody else in the room. Here's the questions. Who has a board that is working well? Actually doing this program. Well done. You know, the reality is, having a board of directors is the most important thing that your really is. And having a good board is going to make a great organization. And it's difficult to transition when you've got a challenging board. So you may not want to, based on who's in this room, you can maybe give me a signal, you don't want to raise your hand, that your board needs How many people through the board? Okay, you got good, things are working well, anything else? Okay, that's a good place to be. That's a good place to be. So. So. Why there, I did, right, okay. Why does your organization exist? There's a couple people in the room. Tell us what you do.
Coordinate with the library and we connect people.
Didn't know you guys were active. And
Yep.
the moment, this is still in the moment?
Yep.
Yeah, great fun. Who else? Sure. Training things. Name of the organization? We talked, I did that Mustang Eater, Mustang Eater makeover, I did their thing, they do things.
Use it for their couple of experienced, others. Vehicle education experiences.
Name of the organization?
Inspire Go is our new name. We used to be the Link Center Support League, but we have over this next year. So we could broaden our focus.
Mike.
In communication about multicultural theater company, and we're developing a two theater company for minority youth. We also have a podcast. We got together.
Got a variety of people. All right. This is why you have a board of directors. Board of directors, this to protect your business. So board of directors' responsibility is to be responsible for legal, governing, and financial issues within your nonprofit. Fiduciary responsibilities, which means they're in charge of the financial part of the money, make sure that everything's healthy, done correctly. So this is what your board is about. All right, let's talk about the characteristics of good board members. Obviously, caring deeply about the mission. Seems like an obvious first statement, but I'm sure, like me, you've been on boards when people join, maybe for reasons that best reason, and then they weren't that because they weren't that interested or they didn't get good input. So this is obviously a first qualification, making sure that they have a passion for business and organizational competency. So realizing again, I'm exclusively with startups. So for me, when I'm talking to people about this, they want to bring all their friends or family to their board of directors. And so really your best business, your best people for your board are going to have passion for your organization, but they need to bring something to your organization that you don't already have. What I find is that most nonprofit leaders that I work with, and I think within this room, you guys are even in your own little category, people, and creatives, which really can create its own challenges from where you're gifted and where your passions are with the dynamics of running an organization. And that's true of almost all nonprofit leaders. So this is a real challenge for all nonprofits. We should have probably a whole thing just on that, about how you can strengthen and structure that. Hiring an executive director, by the way, commonly, you're hiring an executive director who has experience in sales. Because what's the number one job of an executive director? It's not running programs. What is it? Big fundraising. That is the biggest mistake that nonprofit boards make. Sorry for all of you executive directors in this room that that's not your strength. But those of you that's not your strength, you know what I'm talking about. You know, it's hard for you. And a lot of us just learn it along the way. Most of us don't start out. So anyway, I need board directors to have organizational competency and business skills that you are looking for. And in fact, by the way, where I'm talking about this is on your board page 1. You're seeing this is what here is on this document right here. So you want to have long-game strategic thinkers. You want to actually be looking for people that are growing the organization as you're doing it. That is its own skill set. giving your time and your money. We talk about that. We talk about the board commitment form, which you're asking for board directors. But that is the thing, when you are inviting people to join your board, don't forget the fact that you're looking for people that will donate to you and introduce you to influential people that will. Which is a board, part of a board job description, really. And again, a lot of nonprofits aren't doing that when they're recruiting board members. Understanding their role is governance. Okay, for these executive directors in the room, have you ever worked for a board where they started trying to run your organization for you? Yep, I see lots of nodding. So I took over, Arms of Love International was organized or developed by a founder. I took over from a founder. Has anyone in the room done that, taken over directly from the founder? It can be challenging. Yeah, it can be challenging, and it was for me. He was still the chair of the board. So whenever I spoke, his voice was always the loudest voice in the room. And that could be a challenge. I'm not trying to do my job working. So anyway, understanding when you're recruiting your board of directors, and your board's job is governance, not other thing to consider. We talked briefly about the fact, do they have business experience and expertise? Connections, who can they introduce you to? So who in this room has recruited a board member that ended up being extremely influential, that made introductions to that, either to grow a program, to bring in different board directors, bring in money? And who, anyone want to share? You just share, why don't you share?
For chair, it's in part, and our board had seated, cracked and turbulence. And I think they're down to 5 or 6 board members. So they had a concerted effort to grow the board strategically and identified specific organizations that we wanted better representation from. Built from there, and we've probably had as board members in the last year that a broad range of backgrounds and skills. And it's kind of exciting.
Just keep the rest of my presentation there. A lot of incredible skills in this room, a lot of incredible experience. We've all been through, we've all got our failures, we have our successes. Just like everybody, a lot of what I'm talking with you about are failures, things that I do well, that I try to help people. And I tell my nonprofits, you're going to make your own mistakes. My job is to help them make you less of them. So if you can walk out of here tonight with making 1 or 2 less mistakes, then you've used your time well. So, all right. Democrats, who are you looking for on your board? Certain age, certain, if you're a disability related organization, for people that have disabilities. You mentioned your minority youth program. So people that have similar experiences to what you're looking to do. I was on the board of a counseling organization, a nonprofit. We had a board member who actually had run a counseling organization in a different state. That was huge because I'd never run a counseling. So having people that have demographics that broad, especially if you're in a particular area, particular niche. Obviously, personal experience with your mission is always helpful. People that have, when I think people that start nonprofits, they often start their nonprofits because they've had something happen to a friend or a family member, something in their own community, and they want to make a difference by making a change, and they have solved a problem and they want to help other people with that problem. So that's a good thing to have. All right, let's take a look at your current board. We're going to do a little bit of work here. You've got your handout. Let's take a look at, just make some notes. Who's on your current board and what strengths do they bring? So you've got one of your handouts is called the Board Skills Matrix. But actually what I want to think, I'm going to point out strategic board recruiting at the bottom of this one. You'll see numbers 1 through 20. You'll see some different skill sets. So why don't you take a few minutes and write down who's on your board and what skill sets they bring to the table. Strategic board recruiting is where the list is. Yeah, so just write the name of the person and then write down what skills they bring. Alternatively, you can look at this handout here. I created a spreadsheet for you that you can take back home with you. But this is an example of eventually what you're going to work. What are they good at? So one of the things that when people come and they're looking to build a board, they say, oh, I need to have CPA and I need to have an attorney. Right? Well, of course, if you've ever tried to recruit a CPA or an attorney, you realize that everyone's already got them. Somebody was talking about this earlier today. It's the fact that Fort Collins is an extremely philanthropic community. But because of that, you guys you're competing for dollars, you're competing for, I would think, especially in your art, smaller. So again, this is just a quick overview because you guys will have a chance to take this home with you and work on it. So now the question is, where are the gaps? So do you have somebody who is a finance person? Do you have somebody that knows how to do marketing? Human resources, the bigger you get, the more you need human resources. So do you have someone who could do that for you? Strategic planning, of course, is important. Do you have someone on your board like me who specializes in nonprofit governance? Do you have a nonprofit consultant who can do that? But one of the biggest gaps that most boards are missing are people that can do fundraising and marketing. So take a look at your list again, take a look at the needed skill set, things I'm talking about, and see what's kind of glaring, what's standing out to you that you are needed.
Also, the current landscape. But you being AI. But this here that I can see Fred really outsourcing in being successful. That's what we see.
Well, what I would say, even in my own business, is that AI makes my work go faster these days. In fact, AI helped me with this outline and I want to put on my slides. I wrote all these materials well before AI. So these are not AI. But yeah, so the way I answer that is like the resources, with development, fundraising. AI can make it go faster, but having a human still interpret and understand what is going on there is still done. So I don't see AI replacing a lot of what we do anytime soon, because what we do is very personal. Place the cat, place the personal aspect. But yeah, definitely saves me time for sure. I gave it an API with documents and I said, help me gather into a presentation. So you got a true story for today. All right. I think you did a pretty good job. My AI stage actually has a name. It's a very close personal relationship. So, okay. So again, where are the gaps? What's missing? Again, where are you missing in your experience or your connections? Again, don't overlook connections. That's actually a very important part of having good board of directors who can introduce you to other people that you need, especially if we're doing grant writing and those kind of things. Do you have board directors that have exposure to different grant funders? That's not as common, really, but it's always a good thing. Okay. That one little thing, think about that right now. You add one person or one skill set to your board. What would that? One of the it's really easy, especially as nonprofit executives. We wear a lot of it. And I think the challenge can be watching a presentation like this and saying, oh my gosh, I need to do 10 things. That is not my goal for you today. Walk out and when it's one person, then you. Right. Okay. And then it goes to 2 or 3, or 2 or 3, then you can invite to do it. His names with this. Where do you find these people? That's always what people ask me. Where do I find board directors? So first thing, go to your actual donors. Those of you that have, you should have some kind of donor communication, some kind of marketing, some kind of email newsletter. Please do not buy them. And in that, you can have a little form in there when you're looking for a board director. That in your newsletter. We're looking for board directors with these kind of skill sets. It's a great way to do it. People are already involved in what you're doing. What better person to ask than someone's giving you volunteers? Who's volunteering for your organization? Watch what they're doing. Are they involved? Do they show up? Do they do what they say they're going to do? Volunteers are again a great pool for your audience. Those of you that are parents, musicians, basic musicians in the room here. Again, you've got your people that are your following. Who comes to your productions or your art shows or musical theaters, those kind of things. That would be another great, a patron, I guess is what we would call it, patron of what the work that we do. And then of course the general community. There's gonna be a lot of people in the community that are currently untapped. So those are the things where you can sit down and write down, look at your, like say for example, your kids' school. Who do you know at your kids' school? Your kids play in the sport. Who do you know in the sports team? Do you play? I play pickleball. It's 002. Pickleball club just opened right there. Getting to know people there. So as I start talking with them about what I do, what organizations I'm involved with, conversations. So, you know, somebody in your walking club, whatever all that is, just continue to keep your eyes and ears open. Share about what you do, and if someone expresses an interest and they have a skill set, then you can have a conversation. Okay. Again, another action item. What is one next step you can do? The person that you identified a few minutes ago. Does that mean that you send them an email, you invite them to coffee, you invite them to one of your activities or events? What can you do with somebody that you're interested in talking to about a board position? Okay. Let's take a look at what every board member should understand. You guys have comments and questions, by the way, too? Some things. So let's take a look at, this is a very important issue. If any of you guys brought on board directors, not giving them a good orientation, and then they were frustrated because they didn't know you had expectations of them? I certainly have. So because of that, I've created, you're going to see this on, one of the things you have here is the nonprofit board application. If you looked on the very back of it, see, correct that. If you look in the very back of that, this one here, you will see I've created this board member job description and commitment. As we know, in relationships in general, violated expectations is a great way to ruin any kind of friendship relationship, and it's especially true with your volunteers and even more especially true with your board directors. So this is an example of something that you can give them that you want to talk with them about. So here we've got, you know, serve as stewards of the organization's mission, what they do, the role of the board, vision, strategy, and oversight rather than day-to-day operations. Talked about that being important. Governance responsibilities, what they're supposed to be doing there. Then we have the commitment expectations. Are you asking anybody to come to meetings? Seems like an obvious statement, but some people are never told they're supposed to come to meetings. How often they're supposed to come to meetings? Actively attend and actively participate. Prepare for meetings by reviewing in advance. Oh, I have to look at what I have to look at the executive. Again, it seems easy. Maintaining confidentiality, serving as ambassadors. So that was the example of what you do there. Of course, we have fiduciary and financial responsibilities, board operating norms, which goes back to the kind of conversation we had about that they're responsible for governance. Some people will come in and want to manage. Again, I know I've got, if you guys want to raise your hands, but I have funding meetings in this room. They've got a new board chair, and next thing you know, the board chair is trying to manage you. Yeah. Very difficult because I ran an international organization. I actually ran orphanages. Nicaragua, the Philippines, Senegal, to Brazil, Russia, and I went to Brazil, a lot of orphanages. And I had board directors that had never been to the country that I lived in. They were trying to tell me what I should be doing in Nicaragua. They never actually set foot, or you know, in the country. They thought they understood how staff were operating, kids needed, and that was just an example of what I dealt with. Have your own version of that, what you do with the board, and try to understand what it is that you do. You know, our job is to educate them on what it is that we do. Their job is to trust us, that he hired us for a purpose, and to trust us with the jobs that they hired us to do. So, anyways, we have the board member responsibilities, require average commitment 4 to 8 hours per month. And then you can, you know, write down whatever that is for you, depending on their rules and needs. You'll notice here, I've got some errors in this document, don't I? Let's get errors in this document. All right, anyway. You'll notice, for example, under page 3. So board members are expected to. You'll notice that this is a full kind of conversation itself. Full trainings on bylaw to my specialty. Working on them in my very complete in English. But here's a good example. Whatever your board term is, I recommend 3-year term for a total of 6 years. I 2 years is too short, years is too long. Serve on a standing committee, participate in events, attend in person, and then telling them how many you expect them to attend. Because of course, if they're not there, then you don't have one. And then you have them sign it. So this is a really, really helpful tool in your board recruiting. And again, making sure that every board director knows what it is that you are asking to do. So. Do we need to pay? You should pay the board of directors. That was your asking? Great question. No. Yeah, no. Board directors don't get paid. They serve as volunteers. One of the things always realize is that you're 9 months on your. And so if the board directors are getting paid salaries, everyone's going to be able to see that your board directors are getting paid salaries. And it's going to definitely impact your whole. Oh, we are making to do that. However, let me share this. Again, as I mentioned to you, I work pretty exclusively with startups. There are, I would say, a great majority of people that I work with, guesses in this room, that are founders and executive directors. And they want to take a paycheck because they need to survive. This is their job. So there's people in this room that, yeah. So here as I'm saying this, the way that I approach this is in the bylaws. If your bylaws doesn't have a good clause for this, reach out to me and I can give you a good clause. Is the fact that an executive director, a board director can get paid for an operational job on behalf of the corporation. They don't get paid for being a board of director. They get paid for an operational job. So for example, an executive director, again, with most founder organizations, this is not best practice. As I told you, you're going to hear things from me that you will not hear from probably any other board consultant you ever talk to, just because of the way that people are. Most people I work with are founder, the board chair, and the executive director. I would be surprised if this room you've got a couple of those two. with it. So that is very important. So in that case, as I said, I will suggest or acknowledge the fact that executive director needs to be paid. So you're getting paid for an executive director position that has a job description, performance metrics, just like any other executive director you hire. You want to make sure, protecting yourself, that you actually have that in place. If you're getting paid by your nonprofit, have a job description that does that. And keep track of it. So it just goes back to the fact of you work so hard to build your good name in the community and your integrity. And we know that can change very quickly. If people have suspicions, especially your donors, if they think money's not being used well, even if it's not correct, perception is reality. So I just share that with you. That's one of the things that I've seen take down nonprofits and create issues with founders because it's not being done. So I could go on about that. Really, it's a big issue, and but there are ways to mitigate that. But let me give you another example. I serve on a board of Church of California, my best friend and her husband. Clearly no longer live from the Bay Area. And my next fellow Bay Area girl here, I didn't want to live in the Bay Area, but I serve on what I do is part of what my company does is I manage the financial profits as part of the company. So I serve as the treasurer of this church, and I am their paid finance. So in that case, I am a board director that is paid for the job. But that was a very long answer, but I thought it was important to share because again, it can be a very tricky situation. I've had some boards that will say, I've even seen bylaws that said executive director cannot be paid. Yeah, so anyway, weird stuff that is not good. So definitely want to make sure your bylaws are in good order. That could be a whole other presentation, maybe, just on bylaws. Be very boring, but it would be very helpful. So, okay. Anyway, with all that, let's see. Are you done? So anyway, we've got this one here, knowing what your board of directors are asking them to do. So the question is, based on what we talked about, where do you need clarity and structure? You saw my board commitment. Where are you not communicating clearly with your board directors? Either the ones on your current board, are they not showing up to meetings that you haven't told them that they need to? Are they not giving money? That's a whole nother dynamic. There's a whole conversation around. People would use that, which is actually my philosophy, give or get. So give or get a certain dollar amount, $5,000 is normally. But if they don't have the resources to give, you ask people to give. I don't believe in asking board members to give a certain dollar amount. That's just me personally. I believe in asking board directors to give, and the best way of saying it is an amount that is appropriate for them. But again, they can introduce you to people and then bring in money. And what happens is we get very desperate for board directors, so we don't want to ask such challenges that we will all face because we're all struggling to raise money, aren't we? That's why I don't do fundraising this whole time. I did that as a chief executive. But not everyone belongs in the board, but they can. So let's talk about committees and advisory boards. So committees are really one of the most underutilized tools of a board. Because you can have people on your committee that are not board directors. People think that your committees are your board directors just splitting up into different. But you can actually have people in the community serving on your board that's actually really cool. Because you probably have some people in your orbit that have certain skills that could be utilized, but they don't want to come to your board meetings. They don't want to come and sit through a finance report or a program report or governance report, but they would be happy to use it. One great example of this is like the compensation committee. Yeah, do a lot of founder-driven. If you've got a founder that's getting paid, maybe there's a family member on the board, we've got kind of a mixture, which a lot of people do when they start their nonprofit. Yeah, that's the best practice. very common in starting. Often what I say is start with the people that are really connected and close to you, that believe in your mission. And then as you grow, you begin replacing. Yeah, you will never read that if you search Google, but that's just experience. So in that case, for example, you have a finance committee, you have a programming committee, fundraising. So for example, I mentioned earlier, I have a background in nonprofit finance. So Mike says, hey, Kim, I know that you have a love for youth theater. You've got a finance background, you do this work with the economy. I go and sit on Mike's finance committee and talk about the budgets and I give some input and thoughts on things. Give him my expertise. Human resources is a great way to do that. That goes back to the yeah, it's all good. I love serving. Do that all day long. But I find, actually, I'll tell you, I do this all day long in my job. And finally, volunteer. So, true story, true story. Just different seasons, right? Anyway, so yes. Yeah, so finance, program, fundraising, those are going to be your 3 core committees. By the way, I always suggest you have a governance committee, and governance and board recruiting is on every single board meeting agenda. You should always be having conversations about it, but we just did the exercise. Who are we looking for? Who do we know? Where are we at in the process? Every board meeting, you ever seen this, all of a sudden you have a board member or 2 that resigns, and if you haven't, you don't have a pipeline. Did you know that reason would be governance? Governance committee is usually about bylaws, but then also recruiting, anything to do really with the kind of organization of the board. So that would be the so on. So if I'm doing a board agenda, my governance committee, whoever is kind of the head of the recruiting of. And if that's me, then I'm reporting. Your first name? Erica. Erica, you were going to talk to Sharon last month. She's our HR person. How did that go? So as the committee lead, as the committee lead, I'm up to date with what's conversation. If you. But anyway, like I said, program, another great one I started saying is the night conversation, compensation committee. So again, I'm working with founders, especially if they have a very closely held board to start family or very close friends. I often suggest that they have a compensation committee that is outside that group that can actually suggest salaries and payments and things. Again, going back to conflict of interest issues, which is a whole other conversation in itself. Keeping the board, conflict of interest issues to a minimum. Conflict of interest is usually about men. Somebody's unduly benefiting from the organization. You have to be trickier in the way you've done it. But number one reason that nonprofits get taken down is because I know the board. Sometimes they are as necessary. If there's a fundraiser coming up, they're meeting more specifically about that. Finance could be quarterly, or maybe they meet when the taxes are due. So I'd say it really depends. It's like, most boards meet once a month or once a quarter, depending on how active your board is. So then you got the advisory boards that are really just advising. So people will kind of combine them or confuse them, but really are different groups of people. Because you have your board of directors who have a certain level of commitment. Then you have your board committee. I call them working committees, is my terminology, because it's just to define the fact that they are working, they are doing something, they're using a skill set on. Advisors really are just the ones that are saying, these are our opinions, these are our thoughts. People, especially advisory boards, a great way to do is with constituents. Having a board of advisors and your constituents that are actually benefiting from your services, using your services, that way they can give feedback. So anyway, great way to expand the work of your board without actually adding board directors. People will always ask me what's an ideal board member. So I will, again, go back from my perspective as a startup leader. I tend, the minimum required is 3 legally. And I suggest you start with 3 if you're really small. 3 until you begin to grow to the point of where you've got stability. The challenge is if you're a startup, you start bringing in 5, 7, 9 board directors, you've lost your organization because everybody gets one vote and you're here, there, and everywhere. Has anyone ever had that happen? Where you kind of start swirling? Yeah. So I certainly have. So I tend to don't have board directors, just pick 3 board directors. Have the right person. Because again, having the wrong people will break the organization. I've had to remove board directors. It is not. So, I don't want to do that. And of course, it happens sometimes. And then when I've had to remove the board directors, but I can do my due diligence. So anyway, one of the things you saw here was this nonprofit board application. So here are, but you've got some things about what to include on your form. I actually recommend that interviewing people, and again, making sure that they've got the commitment and availability to do what you need to do. And there's also a little bit of things on here about board recruiting, which we're not talking a lot about today, but okay. Okay, we did that one. Okay, what's one step to take in the next 30 days? What action will you take? Let's see what my time looks like. Hey, I'm ending at 5:15 or 5. I'm talking at 5:15. Okay. Not need a perfect board, you need the next right person. So let's talk a little bit about recruiting. So again, you guys have a couple of different documents here that I've given you that overlap a little bit. But the one I have here is called strategic board recruiting. So what's the best way to do this? So we've already talked about recruiting creating your recruiting list. Like I said, who are you interacting with? Where are you hanging out? Who are the people that you can talk to? So then, going back to the governance committee that we had talked about, your board meetings, you're having that time set aside where you're talking about who you're talking to, who you're recruiting for your board. So obviously, the person who's referring that person should contact the candidate, seeing if they're even interested in having a board position. And then the board chair themselves should meet with the candidate along with the board members. It's ideal, it's not happening this way, but it's great if the board director and the referring board member meets together with the candidate just to talk about that kind of thing. Because again, you've got to have a cultural fit too. I think especially the work that you guys do. What you do is very personal type of work. And it's going to be really important that that person is sharing values. So being able to have time together is going to be. And the next step would be invite the candidate to the board meetings. So invite them to come to a meeting. And so one of the things that you'll do in that case is you'll split your agenda because the board candidate will not be in the whole meeting. You're going to might have confidential things on your board agenda that you don't want an outsider to talk about. So what I would do is I would have my board agenda. I would write who's at my meeting, and then I would write a guest. The guest name would be there. And then I would probably have, obviously, you approve the minutes of the previous meeting, your financial report, your executive summary. Those are very classic things to have at the beginning of the board agenda. That person sitting there, listening, watching the interaction, watching their levels of interest, that kind of thing. If there's a conversation that you can have, like say you're looking for an HR candidate, you have an HR issue. Good, in fact, put that into the agenda and it's their opinion. That way you're kind of seeing how they interact. Insight to give you into what their area skill set is. So have them in a, and then by the way, you would put in your agenda, your minutes, so-and-so left the meeting. You did this together with this person in the room and the last. You're always documenting who was in your meeting when they're in and out. So again, they can, then, and I also check references. So that's one of the things that you have on your application is at least 3 references. Hopefully they know the board that they've served on, or people that they've worked with, capacity. That is always a great way to, is the person who they say they are. Might have somebody that you know really well, you might have people who don't. Take the time with that. Again, it's not easy to move, so you want to do it right. And then, of course, if all the input is favorable from everybody, then the candidate would be discussed and voted on in meeting number 2. So that is kind of your very quick thing there. Very quick one. Now, on this other document that I'm giving you,
But I also think it's very second, taking in identification. And I guess I'm curious, your take on the pros and cons of that by CEO versus.
I think that often the executive director is the most active person in this process. Or it should be a job. So yes, I would say that is completely true, that the executive director takes the lead on them, and then brings in the board directors, board chair, other things. Not uncommon for an executive director and board chair to meet with a candidate. Very much like that. However, governance, good governance would be that the board is recruiting itself. So that's why I'm presenting, okay, that's the good governance model. But that is not the practical. Often the executive director is the one that has kind of hands-on interaction. I think that the executive director often brings in some of that. That what you say?
Curious if there's anything right on. I mean, my experience is that the board boards can advocate them to the executive. And they get value in or understanding. It's public board members. It's a committee, executive director, candidates.
Exactly. And I would say that, I think every executive director in this room, I would say most executives, have had challenges with getting their boards to step up and be governance. Often the executive director is kind of pulling. Unless sounds like you probably are a standing good leader on your board. You're more the exception, I think. So I think that yes, practically speaking, the executive director does tend to be the one that leads that. But again, I think a good executive director, a good board chair is teaching the board how to be a challenge that most boards just don't know. Because you don't go to trainings. You've got someone leading a board that hasn't been through a training or knows good governance. Does that help? Excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up and reminding us of that. These are great sources for that. Yes.
How's the structure of the board of something? So you mentioned that board is not like 3%. So how is the structure by this director of the board, member of the board, how structure?
Absolutely. So different boards will call them different things. I tend to prefer the term chair of a board. I think president of a board is confusing because president to me is more of an operational term. You often have lead of a nonprofit. So you're going to have your 3 legally required positions are your chair, your secretary, and your treasurer. Vice chair is not a legally required position. But most organizations will have, if you have 4 board directors, you have a vice chair who's often the president-elect. They're the one that's in the role that will come into the role, president, right, so using chair is used for president, that will often be the chair-elect into the role once the current chair leaves as the vice chair. Those are the three members required. Chair, secretary, and treasurer.
This is part of executive operation. Part of board, but it's really
That's the part of the board of directors. So nonprofit committee, we'll talk about that, is that, the chair, so the nonprofit is owned, not owned by anybody, but it's owned by the community. And the board of directors leads the organization. Executive directors hire a position that can be moved in and out of the organization. The board members are elected. Okay, so again, we could talk more about recruiting. The nonprofit board application has some other dynamics in here, which again, a little bit repeated from the other. One thing again is making sure that you have good job position titles for your board. One of the things you'll get at the end of my presentation, you'll get a slide that has my information on it. So I have probably about 40 different things that I've written just like this, all kinds of different topics. You'll be able to find some of those on my website, find them on my website. Fundraising, bylaws, and so you can find that. But I do have a document on my website that lists the different board policies. And so again, having a document where you can, the offices listed, the job descriptions, so someone knows again what job they're getting into. It's going to be important, or even just a board member job description, what the commitment form was that I gave you. So there was a little thing on here too about onboarding. I actually have a whole document onboarding that wasn't on onboarding. That wasn't really our topic today, so I didn't give it to you guys. But it's on the strategic board recruiting, page 3. I have a whole thing about onboarding, and it's helping the board. Goes back to kind of this question about how do you teach a board how to do good governance. That's really what it is. Having someone who knows how to do good governance and is mentoring other board directors. So I have a thing on my website about onboarding, how to create a good board notebook. All of that is there to look at those resources. So let's talk about I'm going to go through the rest of this and then we'll. Okay, here's some additional resources that are on your, they're in your outline here. So what these are, the Colorado Nonprofit Association. You can become a member of that for a couple $100. They have all kinds of training. They do have this Connecting Colorado. It's happening. Did any of you attended that before? It's a couple $100 to attend. It's an all-day event. I actually have not attended it myself either. But they bring it up here, but that's something you can get from on their website. Interested in getting some more training. Other executive director. No-code nonprofit sector partnership. If any of you familiar with that or attended any of those meetings. Okay, I would recommend it. So the sector partnerships are like a national type of activity that are overseen by chambers of commerce. And they're in different subjects. Like in Northern Colorado, we have one in manufacturing, finance, healthcare, and we have an extremely robust nonprofit sector partnership with about 100 people that come to it. It is a quarterly meeting over in Johnstown at Beverage Company, High Country Beverage. They're free, and you get to hang out with people that are executive directors. There's little committees, because what they're trying to do, the whole point of it is how do we work together as a nonprofit sector to be stronger? So I'm on the board governance committee, Sean. I'm on the board governance committee. They have one for staffing. They have one on fundraising. So we get people that bring their own skills and gifts together and are able to share. They have their own website, etc. How do they recommend that? Get on their email newsletter. And the library, nonprofit Nook. Amada Simental is the business librarian there. Have any of you ever met with her? And she doesn't specialize much in nonprofits. In fact, normally she sends them to me. But she's a business librarian primarily. She's been doing this, in the Harmony Library, so you can kind of check that out there. I think, okay, yeah, I do. Guess I didn't give you the resource to how to find it, but I know it's on Facebook. I've seen it. And that's for the Harmony Library. All right, this is me. Just so we talked about from the beginning, my specialty is doing 100% done for you nonprofits, for those of you who did. Before training and development, some of what we did today. Again, bylaws is my specialty, going through bylaws, working on those, because bylaws, if they're not done right, can also be an absolute mess. You're trying, bylaws are like insurance. You don't need them until you need it. And you gotta make sure your insurance policy is in good shape. Your bylaws are the same way. That's something I specialize in. And also I do financial management. There's the website. And this is, if you wanted to connect with me, do that there. And this is actually my website where I mentioned I have the resources. Actually, the business is you can sign up. I have newsletters that go out, just like many do, and the newsletters will send you up-to-date information. I send out my resources. I send you stuff going on in the community, so you can sign up for my newsletter. You'll get a couple different options about whether you are a new nonprofit. Yeah, it's on this page. It's on page 3 of your notes. So we've got a few more minutes for questions. All right, we got 15 minutes for questions. Shoot. All right, go ahead.
So we're moving from an appreciation. I'm curious if you have any for idea for shipping.
That's tricky. That's tricky, but congratulations about it. And most startup boards are operating boards, are doing the work. That's a great step. It's hard to get to that point for sure. I think that some of it is clarifying, kind of like the board commitment form that I have. It's clarifying, creating job descriptions. What is this new board doing and what is it not doing? And then obviously you're going to have a leader, so your operational leader is going to be stepping up. Is that you? Okay, so obviously you're going to be stepping up into a more of a direct leader role. And so having your job description, again, having everything very well defined, everyone has agreed to it. Making sure that all your board directors have all bought into the fact that they're no longer in charge of running operations. And if they're not, it might be time to move someone along the way. That's, by the way, why you always have board term limits. People will tell me, I want my board members to stay forever. No, you don't. Want to have board term limits. Yeah, I've seen people send boards for 20 years. So the way I write my bylaws, that you saw in the document there, but I'll write mine, stay on for 3 years, re-elected for 1 additional 3-year term, and then they have to leave the board for 6 months, re-elected if they want another term. Because you do find board directors that should stay on. But those are going to be few.
Just comments here, and that you mentioned. I think finding new board members whose passion aligns with the passion of the nonprofit, so their passion and that they understand their mission with that creative entity. That's number 2. In my work in banking with nonprofit organizations, I've seen a number of them. A lot of it is because they are underfunded and they just don't have the monies to keep it going. So you have to have somebody on your board who is able and capable of doing fundraising and not afraid to not bring in people. thing is you need to have an influencer on your board, somebody who has a community connection, and you do have that as number 19, but who also is willing to go out and develop new relationships, new connections that would be strategic and vital to that.
Great, that's great summary feedback. Great summary. More questions? It's your time.
You suggest engaging and inspiring board members. Sometimes, board meetings can be very businessy, and especially in the creative sector. Sometimes I see you sit in the product to do things, but you want to keep them out of the everyday work, but keep them inspired, moving that vision forward. Because it's about how to invigorate your.
Yeah, that's why I'm sarcastic, sometimes we're more. And that's why it goes back to finding people on your board who have a little bit of a business background, because business people are used to sitting in somewhat board meetings. Because we know, the business people know that sitting in a meeting is. I think one of the ways that I've seen this work successfully is by using the dynamics of committees and advisory boards. So that somebody will put somebody on the board of directors, will not be fit for that because they're interested in the creative. So you've got your committee that you create a committee. And they get to sit and talk about all the things that are exciting in the creativity part, but they're not sitting in the finance and governance. So sometimes it could be looking at your actual board themselves, keeping your three, maybe you only have 3 men on board, 3 men on board that run the actual governing financial legal authority of the corporation. And then have people serve either as advisors or I think that can actually really help. I've seen boards do that successfully. And then usually people are actually very relieved. They're sitting, if they're a creative person and they're sitting in a board meeting where they're having governance, they're very relieved to be invited to. What you do is connect with me. You do there's that in column, which is chat. It's a whole process. And 300. But the advantage, of course, of having it's free. It has to be able to get donations, grants, and then you also have people that join with you because people don't want to necessarily give you their time if it's for your personal benefit if you're running it as a business. Profit, gather people together with you. That's the number one reason. Number one reason why people form nonprofits is to get charitable donations, be able to have a team of people working together as a board of directors. Personal liability is separated. You're a corporation now, so just to you. And then you have a legacy, it goes on without. Those are all great reasons. Just check.
Another question, how does someone go about sort of succession planning? Like the longevity of the organization, not just about founder or about folks that you have good strategies or suggestions around having it move past the original.
So again, the difference between the board and being your now I realize that especially in this room, a lot of different ministries. So I'm a pastor or I'm doing 2 churches right now. These guys are founding members of churches. It's similar yet different. And it's very personal. The work that you guys do is very personal. How does your work? And I think that really kind of goes back to the dynamic of building that board of directors that continues the work after the founder is no longer. So finding that good board, founder being willing to get over authority, power, and control, which is part of the problem. Most founders, I have to say, I was reading students. I could say most, but I'll back off. Many founders. So I think for succession planning, if you are going to do a profit, as a director, founder, having those strong people in giving accountability. Succession is kind of its own topic for sure. How all that works. But again, I think it goes back to the strong board members that's active and involved. And then also even in the staffing, an executive director that holds, it's always hard for us. I have a small team of people. But it's very difficult when it's your own baby, when it's in all of that. I think for nonprofits, and I think especially for world, hard to stick aspects of the to bring something into the sense. So I think it's being a good manager, recruiting a good board, and being a good manager to where you give things away. Thinking you're the only. Okay. Questions.
I'm curious to follow up on them. Members finding there. But it seems to me like there's some value in creative tension that comes from different perspectives. And you certainly don't want to have a board that's simply like a chain that exists now, when in fact, I think most of us recognize that this might have to change. I guess, how does one guard the stability of the organization at the same time? And voices and that may someday take the organization in a very direction.
I think that is the tension. I would be in a stronger tension. Sure. And I think that there is a combination, which is partly where I talk about bringing in skill sets. So they might be art adjacent, so to speak. They might have an interest in art, but just skill set. Because I think it would be very easy to end up with a board of directors that was all arts and people. And you guys are all talking about art forward. So I think again, bringing in your experts' interest, maybe they're adjacent to the field that you're in and have an interest in it, but they're recruiting people at this practice is really what's going to bring your nonprofit to another level. With one piece of advice.
That's great. People around for that.
People, I mean, these days with Zoom and everything else, they do have opportunities to have boards outside of areas. That's not as easy to do for local organizations.
You got to do the
That's good. Very good, everyone. Good. All right, but again, you guys are checking, you can find me.